served your master truly for 7 long years. Then I took up game poaching, on this you now must hear. A shining night is a mighty light in a season of the year. Oh, a shining night is a mighty light in a season of the year.
History is bunk, according to Henry Ford. However, this was a misquote, and what he actually said was, history is more or less bunk. It's tradition we want to live in the present, and the only history that is worth a tinker's damn is the history that we make today. We are making history this evening, but we would not be here now if there had been no mills. We will be travelling back in time this evening with various pop-up cameo characters talking about how the Ringstead mills contributed to the world economy, as well as some very hard times for a lot of those timber mills. I want to acknowledge that there have been a number of mill owners over the centuries, but we are privileged tonight to give a very warm welcome to some family members from the Dodson family. Grandson Billy Hawes and cousin Dr. James Dodson, who have both been generous in their assistance to unravelling the mysteries of the mills. And of course, a very warm welcome to the present owners, Clive and Emily Hodgson. So why are we here? The Heritage Group decided to unravel the mystery history of the 3 mills. Unfortunately, we were fortuitous to be involved in a Heritage Lottery-funded Trading Places project, which is managed by Rockingham Forest Trust at Stanning Plains. This project manages local educational heritage activities, which involves primary schools, whose pupils experience a Victorian day of activities and history within their local village. So let me introduce you to some of the children who took part in Ringstead School's Victorian Day. They will tell you what they enjoyed about that special day. Jaden.
We had a fantastic day with music therapist came to our school and taught us our class. One of the activities we did and also a swimming box which we got from home.
The activity I enjoyed the most was when we were provided with Victorian dressing up clothes to try on. Then we had a pot of ink and a feather quill, which we tried to write with. This was difficult, but a good experience. After completing our writing, we then went outside to experience some traditional games. These games included things like skipping, jacks, hoops, solitaire, and many more. We enjoyed it so much, and everybody gave the experience high marks out of 10.
We walked around the village and we were told about what happened long ago in Ringstead. It was really interesting trying to guess what some of the buildings were originally used for and then finding out. Everyone learned so much about the village and the history to show how special Ringstead is. Overall, it was a really good day and we definitely learned to experience the history.
Thank you, Ringstead Heritage Group, for your time and knowledge.
Jane, Izzy and Sophie.
Hey, you were brilliant.
Well done. Thank you very, very much. The triptych decoupage screen, which you can see over there, was the hands-on project which allowed every child involved to place on the screen a genuine reproduction Victorian scrap, as well as being given individual ceramic money boxes which they personalised with their choice of the Victorian scrap. And this ensured each one of them has a personal reminder of that day. Scraps and scrapbooking was probably the most popular Victorian family pastime for many families. At least there was no TV, tablet or phone to interrupt that pastime. Our extensive digging into the mill's history was concentrated on the period 1830-40 through to the early 20th century. And John Abbott, our chairman, has a very personal connection with the mills as he discovered close family links. As the evening unfolds, you may well be keen to ask questions, so I ask you please to reserve your enthusiasm until the end. There will be ample opportunity afterwards to ask questions and to look at the display panels. And just a word, I'll do the cinema thing. If your mobile phone is on, please turn it off. Thank you, and over to John, who will now start to unravel the mysteries of the Ringstead mills.
Thank you, Roger. We've recently undertaken the most extensive research into Ringstead mills ever. There's enough mill history to write a book even. To start with, we can easily get confused by the names of the water mills, so we'll just talk about Woodford Mill, where we are now, which was once called Willywatt Mill, and even Ringstead Mill. It is much nearer to Ringstead than Woodford, but most of it is in the Woodford parish. But to me, it's always been Ringstead Mill. It has a Ringstead postcode. Then there's Ringstead Cotton Mill. It didn't produce cotton, but it was in one of the hamlets of the Cottons, as in West Cotton and Mallows Cotton, called Cotton Mill or Ringstead Mills. And simply because there was 2 mill wheels being used. This was in the area beyond the old railway line and before the first river line. But over time, the mills have had just 9 owners from the Domesday Book to present day. Crowland Abbey, the Crown, the Shuttleworth family from Market Harborough, George Capron from Southwick, Moses Eady from Burton Latimer, William Dodson from Great Addington, James Hawes, Woodford, son William or Bill, and today it belongs to Clive and Emily Watson. So for my benefit and yours, we have Willywatt Mill and Cotton Water Mill, half a mile from each other. Then there's the third mill, Ringstead Windmill. We know that there were Romans in Ringstead in 250 AD. The Heritage Group have been given artefacts from this period, which have been found in the area. A small garrison guarded the ford below Station Road, just over the railway track towards the river. This would have been a very important river crossing at the time. We have no proof that the Romans had a mill there, but there's a very good chance there would have been some grinding stones of some description to produce flour from corn. The first record of the mill was at the Cottons area and recorded in the Domesday Book in 1086. The book included the nearby Addington Flour Water Mill, which was 500 or 600 metres further on towards Great Addington. Ringstead itself isn't mentioned in the Domesday Book, but is covered by the entry for Raunds. At this time, these lands were owned by the Crowland Abbey near Peterborough. So Willywatt Mill, which was also owned by Crowland Abbey, was in the Domesday Book under Woodford. In the very early days, Willywatt Mill was just a wooden-built mill. Around 1623, a house was built onto the Willywatt Mill using old ship timbers for woodwork. The boat had sunk in 1550s, but we don't know the exact date. Moving on to 1658, Ringstead Windmill was built near Top Lodge. It served the community well for 100 years, and until 1758 it burned down. A week later, Mr. Knighton's windmill in Raunds burned down too. A coincidence? We shall never know. So if you've got the piece of the paper, the A4 sheets, there's actually photos of them. Number one is an aerial shot of the position where the windmill was. Ringstead Windmill was subsequently rebuilt, although we don't know the exact date. And again, it's on picture number 2 on a sheet of paper. By 1765, the mills were in the ownership of the Shuttleworth family of Market Harborough, who purchased the mill, Cotton Estate, and Willywatt Mill. Henry Shuttleworth, who was from a family of landed gentry, paid for a complete rebuild of the cotton mill using bricks instead of timber. And in 1770, he built Cotton Mill House, a 6-bedroom house at the cost of £400, which today is about £250,000. Bricks were brought down by barge from Northampton Vargo Brickworks on the Kettering Road to replace the wooden mill. At this time, there was no local brickworks to supply the amount of bricks needed. It's estimated that 18,000 bricks was used in the build. And again, photo number 3 will show you a sketch of this.
I'm the bargee's wife. We've just come down the river with our load. The last thing I do before turning in for the night is see to the horse. I tether him to graze, I give him a pail of water and a bit of a brush down. He works hard pulling that boat, laden with bricks along the water. It's a long day for us bargees, up at the crack of dawn and 12 hours non-stop till dusk. Sometimes more. And traffic on the river is so busy, it's taken us all day to move this cargo down the river from Northampton. Still, we've got a part load of flour and should be able to pick up other bits and pieces to take back with us. We don't want an empty boat, that won't put food on our plates, and there's lots of mouths to feed. Mind you, it's a good job we've got so many youngsters. They work the locks and pull the boat in places where the horse can't go. Then they help unload and load up the cargo. They definitely earn their keep. As soon as they can walk, they're put to a task. It's a bit cramped for sleeping though. The living cabin's only 6 by 12. There's a small stove and some storage space. The baby sleeps in the drawer. And then we drag the mattresses out and all sleep head to toe. The 2 older lads sometimes sleep with the cargo, but I don't like that. The cabin's cosy, even if it is a bit cramped. Of course, it's not as if we're welcomed once we get here. Oh no, the locals don't like us. They say we drink, fight and thieve too much for their liking. Still, here we are at Stanwick Wharf for the night. We'll set off in the morning before most of them have gone up. We'll be back in a couple of days though. They say that new mill house is going to need 18,000 bricks. That's a lot of journeys down the river.
We know that in 1783 the water mills and the windmill were run by tenant Francis Tidbury, the first Ringstead paper maker. Francis was a well-to-do man and also owned Perrio, or Perry Mill, at Southwark, near Oundle, the first paper mill in the county. He lived his life out at Cotton Mill House until his death in 1813. Now, his estate, even then was worth £3,500, which today is about £220,000. And you can find his gravestone in Ringstead Church, just below the bell tower. Around 1800, there were 114 water mills from start to finish of the Nen. This included mill in tributaries, but most villages on the Nen had a water mill like Woodford Lower Mill, Denford, Thrapston, Islip, and so on. Around this time, John Hall, a paper miller and a paper machine maker, arrived from Dartford in Kent, and he took on the tenancy of Cotton Water Mill. Barges full of rags would come far away as Derby to supply local mills, including the one at Ringstead. John Hall, we believe, experimented with different forms of paper making. He also installed the new steam beating engine, known as the Hollander, which shredded the rags to a pulp, along with the sieves, tanks and a press. We know this because it's recorded in the Northampton newspapers. The last part of the puzzle was the water. The Nen is a hard river water and has a particular mix of nutrients which gave John his quality paper. And on the photo number 4 on your sheet of paper you can see the Holland machine and a watermark on paper. Writer Jane Austen's work in 1814. Writer Jane Austen's work in 1814 was on John Hall's paper. We know this because of watermark with his name and Ringstead Mills on the letters she wrote. And the 50 remaining letters are kept at the Morgan Library in New York. Jane Austen wrote over 3,000 letters but only 160 have survived. And the museum owns just 51, but that's more than any other institution in the world. This photo on mill 5 on a piece of paper.
What do you make your garden? I didn't realise it had companies. If you've not come from England to the next Jane Austen novel, I'm afraid I'm at present writing a letter to my sister Cassandra. I do so like to keep up with my correspondence, especially with Cassandra and the family. I have rather a fondness for fine stationery for that matter. Paper is dear, so I make sure to cover every inch of the page, twice. Cross-writing we call it. First one way, then the other. It helps that my lines are straight, but it is the done thing with paper costing as much as it does. As for quills, I tend to use large goose feathers. I have a rather handsome swan feather in my writing desk drawer, but it was more expensive. Mind, it takes less mending as a result. And the iron gall ink, well, that makes a dreadful mess, but I take care never to blot the page. I must confess I am rather particular about my paper. The reader knows though, you can tell by the watermark in the page. Hold a piece up to the light and you can see the maker's mark. And I'm not the only one. You can tell a lot about a person's status by the paper they choose. I'm often using it to illustrate facts in my books. Just this morning, I was writing about Miss Bingley's elegant little hot press paper. Now you see I'm becoming distracted and I'm giving things away. No, if you don't mind, I must get back to writing my letter. I hope to finish it this evening. People are often asking me how I have time to write so many alongside my novels, but just can't resist. My sister Cassandra teases that they'll end up in the museum one day, but I don't know. Good evening.
After John Hall left, the mill continued to produce a first-class paper hall. They also went to Rush Mills at Northampton to produce paper for stamps, cheques, banknotes and so on. The famous penny black stamp was produced in 1840 at the mill at Rush Mills. Although we cannot prove that the pulp was from Ringstead cotton mill was used for the stamps, but it's very likely that it was because of its high quality. On cotton mill itself, there were 2 water wheels. One set was for grinding stones, and one was for grinding stones was for paper making, and the other was for bone grinding. The bones were boiled down to make them brittle and to remove the fat, which was used as grease on carts and some machinery. Farmers also used crushed bones as fertiliser. The bones came from local butchers and local rag and bone men. And bones were even shipped up the Nen to water mills in barges from cemeteries in Hamburg. This information I gained from the British Association of Paper Historians. The next tenant at Cotton Mill in 1840 was Sarah Ball and her husband John, one of my ancestors, together with a John Sharp. It would seem the Shuttleworth family were not very good landlords, as they didn't do any repairs at all.
I'm Sarah Ball, widow, mother. They call the mill Ball's Mill, but I'm only the tenant. It belongs to the Shuttleworth family. I work my fingers to the bone for them to live in big houses in Market Harbour. They'll be the death of me. They won't pay for the repairs to keep the mill working. And that young Mr. Henry, the solicitor, I've heard bad things about how he deals with other people's money. The rich get richer, and the poor, we get poorer, and that's a fact.
To subsidise the miller's season of work, they were looking for other forms of income. We know most mills had land attached to them, so they could breed sheep and grow crops. Part of this income was from the capture of eels. These were sold for food, and many were sent to London, where jellied eels were, and still are, a popular dish. Is anybody in here tonight tasted jellied eels? Anybody? You have? Yeah. Funnily enough.
I picked out the troublemakers. Rob, have you got napkins there?
It's not my favourite either, but I'm going to have to. That's a Is it? Yeah. Because you have to have a nap. Yeah. But you will. Anyway.
Right, we done.
Okay, here we go. Until its demise, there has been an eel trap at Cotton Water Mill. The eel trap was constructed in 1840, and if you lean over the wall of the first small stone bridge, you can see the date stone. 100 yards up from the mill, on the bank of the river, there was a water channel dug out by hand, and the water would flow into a pond. The water would run under the stone bridge, then by the rear of the mill house, then back into the river. The track consisted of a large wheel attached to a cog spindle and a wooden gate, which when it was turned would draw up the sluice gate and let water through a narrow passage into the pond area, and eel baskets or nets were placed in the pond for the capture of the eels. But Willywatt Mill had a different method of eel catching. They were deflected from a mill rear into a well. But from both mills on average caught 1/2 weight, or that's about 4 stone, of eels at certain times of the year. Moving to 1830 now, William Mitchell, a registered paper maker from Hampshire, signs a 4-year contract with Henry Shuttleworth to work the mills. Mitchell was at the time living in Great Addington. At this time, paper was an important commodity and subject to heavy taxation. But after his contract was finished, he continued to work at Cotton Mill. Now, William appeared to get into financial trouble, as on the 20th of January 1844, he was prosecuted for trying to evade excise duty on paper. The paper in question was watermarked and put into wrappers, which was stamped as duty paid. 3 charges were brought against William, but he seemed to have a smart lawyer who argued successfully that 2 of them should be dropped for technical reasons. So, the nub of the case against him was a ream of paper was found on the premises of a Mr. Thomas Beale of Wellingborough, which had been permitted to Northampton 12 months ago. The grounds of suspicion were that the defendant had got possession of an old wrapper, then refilled it and sent it out again, thereby evading the duty. He got fined £25, which is about £1,400 now, so that's quite a lot. The outcome of all this meant his fortunes diminished from a well-respected papermaker to a labourer, and on his death in January 1863, aged 62, he was working as a labourer on the roads.
All things have changed since I came to live here at Willywatt Mill. Life was hard for us tenant millers, and as my George said to Mr. Capron one wet day when he came to have a look around the mill and we had buckets about to catch the rain, we all manage. But where are my manners? I'm Mary Ivans, and I married my George in Ringstead Church on the 26th of April 1827, and with some help from George's brother William, George and me came to live here in 1835 together with our 8 children. As I said, life was hard. George also did some farming as well as grinding bones for the manure. Then me and the children had our lives turned upside down, for on the 31st of August 1840 my George was found drowned. He'd gone looking for one of his horses which was missing, and he must have slipped on the bank and fallen in the river. Trouble was he couldn't swim. What were we going to do? My George was buried in Rawn's Church a few days later. People were so kind and wanted to help us. There was even a public appeal put into the newspaper, and do you know what it said? It said, "An earnest appeal is respectfully made on behalf of the family of the late George Ivans, farmer and miller of Ringstead, whose awfully sudden death has brought his widow and 8 fatherless children, the eldest under the age of 13, into circumstances of deep distress." It went on to say, apart from raising some money for the family, it was more especially to provide suitable situations for the children. that they may grow up to be useful members of society. Well, we had to sell all the farm stock and the implements, and even the turnips that were still in the ground. But how the local people rallied round us. The boys were found as apprenticeships and eventually married and raised families of their own, and the girls were also taken care of and later married. I'm so proud of them all. But that's enough about me. As I'm a bit nosy, I kept a watch on what was going on hereabouts.
Mary, do you remember that awful incident that happened the year after you lost your George? Do you remember that lad? What was his mother's name? Fanny Lovell. She was only young, about 26. She'd taken Henry to work with her. She'd had to wrap him. Remember, we used to wrap it in a shawl and they'd be on our back. Of course, he was getting bigger and he wriggled and he fell into the vat of the boiling water that was rendering down the cotton waste. They used to put Lyle in it, and in he went, and he scalded to death. Awful, terrible. This is what the vicar of Great Addington Church wrote when he buried little Henry on the 29th of July, 1841. Lovell, Henry William, base-born son of Fanny Lovell, papermaker at Cotton Mill, aged 2 years, scalded to death.
Yes, girl, I did hear. But lots of accidents happened in these mills.
They certainly did.
But back to my story. After we left, along comes John Smith. He was from Northampton, but he didn't stay too long. Mind you, after things had been done up a bit, the land, the mill and the house was put up for sale.
The Shuttleworth family in the area added a great deal of money to the estate, but fortunes turned against them. The mills and land were put up for sale again and purchased by Mr. George Capron in 1839 for £6,500, which is about £286,000 now. George Capron owned lots of land in and around the village, and he lived in Southwark. In September 1844, it seemed the tide had turned and the business of milling took a dive. All the mills were put up for auction, and Ringstead windmill ended up being dismantled, and the timbers were auctioned off in the Mason's Arms pub in Thrapston. Then in 1845, the railway came to Ringstead and a new station was built. This was bad news for the mills, as cheaper corn was being imported from America, and the railways meant that corn could be delivered around the country more easily.
In between times, various blokes came here and they had a go at the milling game, but they soon packed up and moved on. But another tenant who was here was a Moses Eady, a miller from Burton Latimer, same as his dad had been, and maybe he wasn't too keen on making paper because he put an advert in the Stamford Mercury in 1861 to sell the cutter and presses. He said they were a bargain. Mind you, he bought the mills in 1879 from the Capron estate.
Moses also kept livestock at Cotton Mill, and it was recorded at one time that he had 48 sheep and 41 lambs on the land surrounding the mill. One day, 12-year-old Great Addington boy, Freddie Sharp, drove all the livestock to Kettering Market to sell. Of course, the staff at the market were suspicious and he got found out. The case went to court, but kind-hearted Moses didn't want to have the boy prosecuted because of his tender age, and he was let off with a stern telling off. Within Ringstead, cotton mills had ceased to work completely around 1880. The Willywatt mill wasn't producing anything for a short period, so Moses Eady decided to leave the mills and went off to run the windmill at Burton Latimer. The river from Northampton to Peterborough was often frozen. This meant the watermill wheels were unable to turn. The winters were real winters back then, with severe frost for months and deep snowfalls too. The river froze most years enough for the local people to go skating on it. Some years, an area around Cotton Mill was cleared and a 100-yard sprint with prizes were arranged. In January 1881, the road from the village to Rawns was blocked by snow to a depth of about 4 to 6 feet, and gangs of men were employed to cut through the drifts. And then there were the floods. The floodwater took away part of this bridge just outside here, Willywatt Mill, leaving no carriageway to Addington Road. Later people became more adventurous, and an extract from Northampton Mercury tells us of 2 men from